introduce him to all of you. Just a second. I hope you can see all of this. As you had already opportunity to hear Professor lectures, he is a great lecturer and professor with quite impressive biography. So I can't go through all of that. So I just highlight some academic areas of expertise. As you can see, this is the wide range of expertise, and that is our pleasure to accomplished knowledge from person like these professors. And so I'm really honored to introduce you. As you can see, these expertise are regional groundwater modeling, water mission statement, waters dismantling, sustainable development, stochastic hydrology, etc., etc. The list is too long for this quite tight schedule. I would like to invite Professor to deliver his first lecture named by Hydropower Development and Environmental Impact. Please, Professor, mic is yours, and I'm stopping sharing.
Okay, 1 second. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to contribute to the summer school. I'm just now here in Odessa, Ukraine, where I'm attending another summer school with some similar issues. And I would like to thank also Mr. Sanjay. He was perfectly correct when he said a very senior lecturer. So I'm retired since pretty long time. Today and now I would like to speak about transboundary water management. And as I'm coming from Vienna, Austria, I have been involved for, well, pretty long time in collaboration in the Danube Basin, and I was also involved in establishing, I was contributing to some of the documents which helped us in developing a framework for transboundary water management, the Danube Basin. It's written here that the connection is not stable, but I hope you can understand me, and I will continue. So, there are many slides included in this PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry, I will skip several of them. They are only included in the interest of those who want to learn more about some of specific documents, etc. So, structure of my presentation. At the beginning, I will say a few words about European water policies. I will put the emphasis on free documents, and then I will speak today only about the Danube. I tried to include also RLC and the Nile, but this is not feasible within that period. But you should be able to find also some documents about the RLC in the folders which we have sent to the organizers. And then summary and conclusions. Okay. First, I would like to present very briefly to you some relevant documents related to water, also with some remarks that is still missing. And secondly, I would like to emphasize the process, how we came from a bilateral water management between upstream and downstream partners to a basin-wide approach. And why do I emphasize these European documents? Well, I don't want to sell something, but to my opinion, they contain some relevant aspects, and to my view, they were quite relevant in developing a useful framework for transboundary water management. So I think for collaboration, basically, there must be a need, there must be a problem or something. Otherwise, there is no need to do research, or there is no need to establish transboundary issues. At the beginning, there must be a problem. And in the last decades, numerous examples about transboundary cooperation can be found and were developed. I'm referring to a few: Rhine, Danube, Mekong, Nile, Zambezi, Jordan, Amu Darya, Sydaria, so the Aral Sea Basin. And I was involved in the Danube case. We did several projects on Amu Darya, also in Jordan, and on the Nile Basin, within the Nile Basin Initiative. And when you go to the literature, you can find, especially about 10 years ago, and still from time to time, you can read in newspapers, concerns are raised here and there about future water conflicts, even wars about water. And well, we could discuss that for a pretty long time. I refer you, if you are interested in, to the freshwater dispute database developed mostly by Aaron Wolf. I think it's available via Oregon State University. The link is here. And they analyzed numerous problems related to conflicts about water, but one example can be found addressing war to solve the dispute, but this is about more to 3,000 years old. It was a problem between Ur and the neighboring city about irrigation water. The other documents, rather than the other conflicts or disputes, rather refer to successful programs which were developed to overcome the difficulties. So when I speak about Europe, so what are the main problems in Europe? We have water shortage issues in the south, in Spain, in Italy, in Greece. We have mostly pressures on water bodies with respect to quality and with respect to morphology. So this means most of our rivers are heavily modified water bodies far away from its natural state. And this also creates some pressures on ecosystems, substantial, due to the intensified land use. Also, with respect to pollution, a risk is imposed on the whole water cycle. And of course, climate change issues are also relevant. So, very briefly, 3 documents. For sure, you know very much about the Dublin Statement on Water, and I think they are very perfectly describing the situation, what the discussion level was in 1992. So freshwater is a finite and vulnerable resource, essential to sustain life. Water development and management should be based on a participatory approach involving users, planners, policymakers. Women play an essential role, and water has definitely an economic value, but it should not be used and regarded as an economic good. Fully agree on these principles. Then the European Framework Directive on Water from the year 2000. I mentioned previously, the main issue is water pollution in rivers, especially in groundwater system and in the coastal water bodies, and the Flood Risk Directive from 2007. And without going into detail, first of all, the Framework Directive started with something what we can call holistic approach. So we should consider quantity, quality, and morphology. That's, I think, is very essential. Second approach, it should be basin-wide, and public participation is clearly underlined. And to develop a framework for water management, common principles among the countries, whatever had to be developed and applied. And this is described in detail, so you can find it later on. Basin-wide approach, polluter pays principle is also addressed, and considering the dynamics in development of society, considering the changes in climate. So all these measures and programs have to be regularly updated. And all what is being developed as measures, as tool, as a program for implementation requires public participation, and the documents which have to be delivered to Brussels have to be made public. And I think that's really something very essential. The same holds also for the flood risk directive. Due to the floods we had in the last decades, I wouldn't say that flood frequency is increasing, but definitely damages are increasing. And this is maybe not directly related to climate change, but is more related to land use. But climate change plays also an essential role in these increased damages. So, what are the principles and what is missing? Again, we have the dynamic aspect of updating. So land use climate change is somehow represented. What are the impact domains? Human health, environment, cultural heritage, and economic activities. A lot of documents are developed to understand the problem and to communicate it. And here you see the updating procedure. Yes, then this is an example of the documents that are available. I would like to emphasize 2 points here. One is try to reduce existing flood risk. So as the situation is now, try to improve it. And second, very important, again, unstable network. And the second point is try to avoid the emergence of new risks. Also interesting, non-structural measures are emphasized. So all measures have to be considered, also engineering measures, but it's underlined non-structural measures. We don't go into detail, but I think that's very essential. And again, at each level, public participation is recommended. Here, I would like to make a short statement. Public participation is definitely the basis for achieving sound solutions. But somehow I think it might be also misunderstood, because it's also necessary to transfer the information which has been elaborated by scientists at an understandable level to the concerned people. And I was involved in some meetings with stakeholders, and it did not work very good, I would say. Why? Because the concerned people have there, of course, that's obvious, their personal interests, but they were not really well informed what problem should be solved by which techniques. So, and when they realized it was not really perfectly helping them, so they did not follow the procedure to achieve a compromise, for instance, between neighboring catchments, whatever. Also, when you go to the framework directive on water, you will see that still something is missing. Also in the flood risk directive. For instance, to my opinion, sediment regime is very essential. It's neither addressed in the water directive nor in the flood risk directive. But still, catchment approach, public participation, consideration of different time horizons is found in all these documents. I've said that already. Yeah. Now we face a problem somehow that countries have different standards, different legislation, different institutional structures, etc. Economic levels are quite different. So all these settings constitute somehow a constraint for achieving compromise among different parts of a region or a catchment. I would like to give an example about the Danube here. So in the Danube we have, I was told it's the most international river, a lot of countries you can see here. So when we start from upstream, Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Moldova, plus very small territories of the Danube Basin are located in 4 more other countries. About 80 million people live in the region. So really quite a complex structure. Brief description of the development of cooperation. So the first declaration I know which addresses parts of water concerning the whole Danube Basin was the so-called Belgrade Declaration about navigation along the Danube. And then I think this helped also to support the basin-wide approach was the establishment of scientific organizations. In 56, so more than 50 years ago, International Association for the Danube Research has been established, and all the Danube countries became members. They were addressing limnology, water quality. About 25 years later, within the International Hydrological Program of UNESCO, a scientific association of hydrologists and water managers within the Danube Basin has been established. And I think an interesting point is, I think in each country we had, of the Danube Basin, we had quite a good administrative structure, we had excellent scientists there, but still we were exchanging scientific information. This was more or less the only channel to do that. But we were not able, for instance, to come up with a coherent, basin-wide information. This was realized still under, before the collapse of the socialist countries, in the Bucharest Declaration, that they found each country is measuring a lot, but we don't have joint and agreed water quality standards. We don't have an agreed monitoring program, and we measure with different equipment at different times. So each country published its data, but they didn't fit really together, because mostly when the problem was, we worked on a bilateral level. What are the problems in the Danube Basin? High BOD-Loads, mainly nutrients. We have a lot of sensitive ecological areas. Think about the delta, huge wetland, but also along the river course, there are several areas which constitute valuable wetlands, but they are exposed to major risks. And there's also a problem, morphological changes of the river. No coherent database. To give an example about BOD-Loads, in this map here, this gray shaded bars indicate the situation in the tributary, and the white ones describe the situation in the Danube Basin. And this refers to BOD concentration. And you see, in the tributaries, the problems are much worse compared to the Danube. And even it decreases BOD load when you go downstream. So here we are upstream part, and here we in Ukraine. This means the river has still a certain capacity to digest the load. So there's something like a capacity for water purification due to the remaining wetlands along the major rivers. Problems are mainly along tributaries. And it started by an outsider, Équipe Cousteau, in 1993, so just after the changes of the political settings in Europe. He came with his own crew and made a survey about concentration and environmental state, here concentration of heavy metals, but also about the state of the environment going by boat and helicopters from upstream to downstream. This map, without going into detail, shows clearly that the pollution level here in the downstream part is much higher than in the upstream part. The downstream country said, well, this is due to sediment input from upstream, and the upstream people said, well, this is mainly due to local input. We had a lot of pollution sources, including petrochemical industries. Then we have severe, it's also a big problem, accidental spills from mining industries, from ships, etc., untreated wastewater. So I don't want to blame someone, but in Budapest, Hungary, they started quite late with a wastewater treatment scheme for Budapest. In Beograd, city with 1.5 million people, even later. But I think much later, they started in Brussels to come up with a wastewater treatment plant. Today, we have microplastics and water biota. Another example about hydrocarbons in sediments. This is the mouth here at zero. This is the upstream part. And you see some, well, areas with heavier loads. This is downstream of Bratislava. And to the right side, this is in Romanian-Bulgarian section. So not equally distributed. You can really see some, if you want, hotspots. Then we had the political changes in 1989 to 1990. This resulted in collapse of Yugoslavia. New states emerged. We have still today some political unsettled problems. And this means also that several of the former socialist countries are in the meantime part of the European Union. Some countries are still accession states. Associated with these economic changes, you see here some figures about decrease in industrial production in the first years and economic growth rate, how it changed after the collapse later on. For instance, Czech Republic here, substantial decrease, but then they recovered quite well and developed. This is situation of GDP estimated for 2002. And this is the GDP estimated for 2017. So you can see, without going into details, but this might provide the background information for you. There is a clear gradient from the upstream countries to the downstream countries. Summarizing, what are the problems? Environmental degradation, high nutrient load, no coherent database, no clear vision for the whole basin, no public participation. So then new initiatives started based also on the framework directive of water. It was clear that several of the countries will join European Union soon, so this required to follow the framework directive on water, etc., and to develop a basin-wide approach. To launch really a program, European Unit established a program coordination unit 1990 in Brussels, and then there were several private or external initiatives, as I said previously, Fondation Cousteau, several NGOs. They were also interested from different Danube countries to get a coherent picture of what's going on, who might be able to contribute to improve the situation. And this means they started also several representatives from ministries started to develop a convention for sustainable use of water resources, including also other environmental aspects, not only water, but in the text is written water. And general objectives and principles were developed. What are the goals? Sustainable and equitable management, control of hazards, and where does the Danube release all its pollutants of 80 millions? To the Black Sea. So also think about, take measures to reduce pollution load to the Black Sea. And then an environmental program was developed to support the goals of the convention and also to follow these sub-goals which were defined previously. Again, I think it's interesting, although there is really a high expertise among the various experts in the Danube Basin. First, IUCN took responsibility for reviewing and harmonizing the national reports. I was also involved in doing that, so the national countries got a clear outline how they should develop their national reports, characterizing all the environmental issues and problems of their countries, and also what kind of principal strategies they were proposing. And then, I don't know how many we were, maybe 10, 15 experts were invited to develop a joint and coherent view for the Danube Basin, and we had to communicate with the various ministries in the Danube Basin. This is the report. What are the main principles of the environmental program for the Danube River Basin? Integrated, air, land, water, participatory, and involvement of the public. Then the PCU moved from Brussels to Vienna, and the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River was established. I have to speed up. This is the structure you can see. And then several activities were launched. Again, something like a task plan has to be developed to identify the major areas of risk, etc. And the first river basin management plan was ready in 2009 and covering the whole basin. This is a strategic action plan, only valid for a certain period. This is the Danube River Basin Management Plan. Again, the public has been invited to comment on it. I was told not too many feedbacks were collected. Maybe deficit in communication. This is a map of hotspots. So these are highly polluting either areas or industries, whatever. So these are the results. Then also a set of actions was developed considering not only physical measures, institutional aspects, policy, legal and regulatory measures, and they were agreed among the countries under the umbrella of the ICPDR. Actors, well, of course, the governments, because their representatives are within ICPDR, but also public authorities, the public and NGOs. And I think they played a very useful role, especially in the beginning of the program. Principles, well, we don't need to discuss. What has been achieved? Today, we have an agreed database about pollution. We have an agreed database about environmental quality in a wider sense. And every, I think, 6 years, a joint Danube survey is launched where a huge boat is going with a lot of laboratory equipment, is going from the upstream to the downstream with experts from the various countries. They measure jointly, they publish their results. Everyone can see that. And of course, we have an agreed river basin management plan. We have efficient institutions. And I think that's already something. And in the long term, this, I think, was from 2001, the first Danube survey. This deals with total phosphorus concentration in the average in the river basin. And you see, joint Danube survey number 4, well, we have substantially reduced phosphorus concentration. The same with nitrogen. It's about 50% lower now. And then you find again, this is E. coli concentration along Danube, an indicator for wastewater treatment. Where you find the names, this refers to tributaries. And you see most of the problems are found in the tributaries. The other points without name, it's a longitudinal profile, refer to the river, main river. So you see in the main river, it's somewhat better than in the tributaries. Again, some pollution level. This is, for instance, chemical substances of different origin. Blue part indicates chemicals from industrial sector, and the green indicates originating from agricultural activities. And this is, again, a very useful information. Everyone believes now in this data. Everyone can check the data. So it's not anymore a question who is responsible about that. Conclusions. Several actions were somehow initiating the start of a cooperation. And again, from the Fondation Cousteau, IUCN, World Bank, and EU Directorate. The existing scientific organizations helped in executing the various tasks. So the river basin management plan was somehow structured under consideration of the European documents. And so it worked. And in the meantime, we have several subcommissions for the Sava River, for the Tisa River, even within the Danube. And the commission, ICPDR, I think they publish a lot of these documents. So everyone of you who is interested, go to ICPDR homepage and you can download a lot of very recent documents. Still, and this was a prerequisite of all the countries, they are in the position to take the final decision. And this was the case in a few examples. Maybe you have heard about the conflict about Gabčíkovo. It's a hydropower scheme along the Danube between Slovakia and Hungary. This conflict has not been solved yet. It's going on since maybe 25, 30 years, something like that. And also ICPDR tried to stay apart, and no solution has been found yet. Still, there are some deficits, as I said also at the beginning, with respect to sediments. Flood risk can be also, the flood risk management can be also improved, but major steps have been yet achieved. As I said, land management and land use is not 200% addressed. Sediment management is lacking. We have some regional deficits in wastewater treatment. I mentioned at the beginning Budapest and Beograd, but also in some regions like Bosnia-Herzegovina, the wastewater treatment capacity is quite limited. Okay, I think that's it, and I would like to thank you very much. You will find much more documents in which might be useful for you. Thank you.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for this